In Romans chapter 16, verses 1 through 7, Paul introduces and greets or commends three women of whom we should get to know to the best of our ability. Unfortunately, what we can learn about them ultimately proves very ambiguous, and what is left unrevealed, unfortunately, is far greater than what has been revealed. But we do well to consider what Paul has to say about Junia, about Phoebe, and about Priscilla. In Romans chapter 16 and verse 7, Paul says, "Greet Andronicus and Junia, my compatriots and my fellow prisoners. They are well known to the apostles, and they were in Christ before me." At this point in the Roman correspondence, it's toward the conclusion, he's giving his greetings and salutations. He's made it clear he has never visited the churches of Rome, or the Christians in Rome. He is looking forward to that opportunity, and this letter is kind of being sent in advance, kind of preparing the way for that. After he goes to Jerusalem, he wants to visit Rome as he's heading to Spain. And unique among all of the various greeting sections that we find, in Romans we see there's a lot of explanation given, which gives us an understanding what Paul is doing. A lot of the people Paul is writing to don't know Paul, but they would have known these Christians who are in Rome, Christians like Andronicus and Junia. And Paul's goal is by saying that he commends and honors Andronicus and Junia, like they honor Andronicus and Junia, that they should be able to trust him. Even if they don't know Paul, they know Andronicus and Junia, who know Paul and think well of him. Therefore, they would hopefully think well of him as well. This is all that we know about Junia is from this verse. What can we tell about Junia about this? Junia is a Latin name. Andronicus is a Greek name. Why does Junia have a Latin name? Is it because she is a Hebrew that has a Hebrew name and then uses the Junia as her Latin name? Some have suggested that Joanna might be the Hebrew equivalent, and she is Joanna, the wife of Chuza, back in Luke chapter 8. But why is she paired with Andronicus? There might be siblings, but they're likely husband and wife. And that would mean that it's probably not Joanna, wife of Chuza, is it? Andronicus is a Greek name. Junia is a Latin name. She might well have been born a slave or is a slave. She might be a free woman. We can't tell. The text never tells us. We need to at least be open to either possibilities. What we do know is that she's Jewish. She's a fellow kinsman of Paul. Probably not referring to like a sister or a niece or a cousin or something, but that they share in being of the Israelites. That she has been a Christian longer than Paul has, therefore that she came to faith in Jesus at some point before the events narrated in Acts chapter 9. That she is well regarded by the apostles, therefore she has spent some time in Jerusalem at some point, or in Judea, or in the environs of Israel, so that the apostles would have a chance to get to know her. Either she was active in Jesus' ministry, maybe one of the women following Jesus. There's some traditions that suggest Andronicus was one of the 70 or 72 disciples that Jesus sent out in Luke 10, which is a possibility. But again, the text never tells us. We cannot know. She is well regarded by the apostles. Is she among the apostles? Has been one of the great questions. Even if we are inclined to use the evidence in the Greek to suggest that that is a likely explanation of Paul's construction, the way that John Chrysostom and many other church fathers understood it, we still wouldn't know the nature of her apostleship. The word for apostles meaning one sent. The fact that she is an apostle does not automatically mean she is reckoned as one of the 12 or having the kind of authority as one of the 12. There are other forms of apostleship. It's somebody sent with a commission. Jesus may have a specific commission for Junia. We don't know its nature. However, what we can see in the text, there's so much we can see. So much that Junia, of course, would know, what Paul would know. When were they all in prison together? They were fellow prisoners. He doesn't just throw that out there about everybody. At some point, Andronicus, Junia, and Paul were in a prison together. When was that? What were the context? What happened there? We'd love to know. How did Andronicus and Junia work together? They both seem to be apostles. And again, what is said about Junia is also said about Andronicus. What is the nature of their apostleship? How did they work together? How did they do their own thing? All of these things are wonderful questions to which we don't have answers, and we won't have them until we can talk with them in the resurrection. But what we can see is that Junia here is somebody well honored by Paul, and Junia is a woman. It is only very later in the late medieval and Reformation period is there the suggestion that somehow Junia is really Junius and a man. There is no early textual evidence for that. It was well understood from very early on that Junia is a woman. And any discomfort that causes is something that we need to grapple with, because Paul honors her highly, values her, and recognizes her, and perhaps even having this kind of an apostleship. Earlier in the chapter, in verse 1, we read, "Now I commend to you our sister Phoebe, who is a servant of the church in Cenchrea, so that you may welcome her in the Lord in a way worthy of the saints, and provide her with whatever help she may need from you, for she has been a great help to many, including me." All we know about Phoebe comes from these two verses. The fact that Paul does not identify her as Jewish means she is likely a Gentile of Greek origin, which would be consistent with her name. She is a diaconon of the church in Cenchrea. The church in Cenchrea is one of the two port cities of Corinth. Cenchrea is on the eastern side, facing the Aegean Sea. Lechion is facing the Gulf of Corinth. it was a major shipping port. A lot of ships would come in to Cenchrea, unload, load on in Lechion, and continue west, or vice versa. And so that is why it is very possible that she is involved in some kind of maritime business activity. The fact that she is a diaconon, what does that mean? It's one of the eternal questions, because there's so much ambiguity with the way that word is used in the New Testament. It's possible that it is the office of a deaconess. By the 2nd century, there is evidence that early Christians had the office of a deaconess, of women serving women in the congregations. 1 Timothy 3:11 can be so read that it's the women likewise, that Paul is trying to give some kind of standard for deaconesses. On the other hand, Epaphras and Timothy in Colossians and 1 Timothy are called diakonos, even though he's not referring to the office. It can refer to just being a servant. And the evidence in 1 Timothy 3 is also ambiguous. It could just refer to deacons' wives. So we can say that Phoebe might well be a deaconess and have an office, but we can't be sure. And if nothing else, though, she is seen as a faithful servant of that congregation. What we can say is that she is a praestatis, which by this point is a female patron, a patroness. In the ancient Roman world, patron-client relationship was everything. Patrons would be of some means, and they would financially support clients, who then would be expected to laud and honor their patrons. The patron-client relationship is something that Jesus is kind of critiquing in Matthew chapter 20 behind the scenes, about them being called benefactors and things like that. However, the fact that Phoebe is a patroness, and is a patroness of Paul and many others, shows that she is trying to use it in ways that glorify God, and that she has agency over it, whether she's a widow and has complete control, whether her husband has given her a dispensation of authority over the estate. We're not quite sure, because again, so much is left unrevealed. But the fact that Paul is commending her to the church in Rome, she is not from Rome, she's in Cenchrea, and the fact that he's commending her is a strong suggestion that she is traveling to Rome from Cenchrea. And that is why we believe that Paul is writing this letter from Ephesus and gives it to Phoebe. And in that letter that Phoebe is delivering to the Christians in Rome is this commendation of her, so that they will provide for her needs while she's there in Rome on whatever business or she has to deal with, whether it's actual business, whether she's trying to make an appeal to somebody in the imperial authority, whatever the reason of her travel might be, that she would be taken care of by the Roman Christians. We also can see in 3 John that this is supposed to happen, that Christians are supposed to provide for Christians as they're traveling to and fro in the Roman Empire of the time, a time of where travel was very possible in a way it had not been previously and would not be again until 19th and 20th centuries of our own time. So she is a patroness, she might be a deacon, is definitely a servant, well regarded by Paul, and Paul has so much confidence in her that she is the one that he entrusts to bring the letter to the Romans, to the Roman Christians. That shows a lot of confidence that he has in her, and the value that he finds in her, and all that she is providing in her work for the Lord. Likewise, we continue. Greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who risked their own necks for my life. Not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful to them. Also greet the church in their house. Here we meet Prisca, otherwise known as Priscilla. Prisca is her official name, Priscilla the Latin diminutive that Luke will prefer in the narrative in Acts. Unlike Phoebe and Junia, there are other passages that talk about Priscilla. Priscilla, we meet in Acts chapter 18, that she and her husband Aquila have moved to Corinth from Rome after Claudius had expelled all of the Jewish people from Rome. And they're tent makers. Paul finds them. The fact that Luke calls them Jewish and tent makers gives us a strong impression that maybe they are some of the first converts of Paul. Paul is staying with them, working with them as tent makers, and shares the gospel with them. And then from what Paul says here and what we see in the other passages, the strong suggestion is that Priscilla and Aquila are not just fellow Christians, but they are very active in the work of ministry. They are jointly participating, helping Paul in the proclamation of the gospel in Corinth. They stay in Corinth with him and work with him in that for 18 months that he's there. When Paul leaves Corinth, they leave Corinth with him. They go to Ephesus with Paul. Paul goes, preaches the synagogue. Paul then heads to deal with some business in Antioch of Syria. Priscilla and Aquila remain. It's while Paul's gone that Apollos shows up in the synagogue and starts proclaiming, only understanding the gospel of John, from John the Baptist, and the baptism of John. And Luke says Priscilla and Aquila take him aside and teach him the way more accurately. The fact that Luke is foregrounding Priscilla here is a strong indicator that Priscilla was the one who took the lead in thus explaining and helping Apollos understand better. The fact that while Paul is in Corinth in 57 writing to the Romans and is asking them to greet Prisca and Aquila, after the fact in 1 Corinthians he says that he's providing the greetings of them from Ephesus, shows that they stayed in Ephesus until the riot probably, and then when Paul left, so did they, and they eventually ended up back in Rome. Both in 1 Corinthians and in Romans, Paul says also greet the church in their house, which suggests that maybe they are hosting the church, maybe they have children or other members of their household are part of the church and they have a house church there, or they have other Christians who constantly continue to meet with them, both there in Corinth and now here in Rome. And the commendation that Paul has is even greater here, that they risked their own necks for his life. We don't know when that happened. There are so many opportunities, right? When he's brought before Gallio, when we have the riot in Ephesus, maybe other situations where Aquila and Priscilla risked their own lives to help Paul out. That not only he, but all the church of the Gentiles greet him and are grateful to them. So Priscilla and Aquila have been doing a whole lot of work and are commended and valued by Christians all around the Gentile world because of what they've been doing in at least Ephesus, Rome, and in Corinth. In 2 Timothy 4, Paul tells Timothy to send greetings to Aquila and Priscilla, which gives a strong impression they're back in Ephesus. And in fact, in some of the early traditions we see in apostolic constitutions, Aquila is reckoned as one of the elders in the church in Ephesus, and in those traditions they are both martyred together. This is the witness we have about Phoebe, Junia, and Priscilla. And again, there's so much more that we wish we could say, so much more we wish we knew. It'd be great to talk with them in the resurrection about the various things they did in their ministry and how powerful it was. We need to be very clear, though, that no matter how many things are not revealed, what has been revealed is how they were very active in the work of ministry, and Paul commended them and valued them and honored them. In Galatians 3:28, there is neither male nor female in Christ Jesus. We are all one. The gospel came to a very patriarchal world, and yet this equality of both genders was valued in God's sight, and their work was all valued together. And unfortunately, Christians have often got away from that in their patriarchalist mold, because there have been patriarchalism in societies until the very modern day, and persists in the modern day. And that has led, however intentionally or unintentionally, to denigrate women as second-class citizens, often only seen good for teaching the children in Bible class and serving behind the scene. We can see that Junia, Phoebe, and Priscilla are doing much more than that. And they are commended by Paul, commend the sight of God and in Christ. Does that mean that we should invalidate 1 Corinthians 14 or 1 Timothy chapter 2? Absolutely not. There are clearly restrictions in the assembly about the work they're doing. That we have from those passages from the same author, Paul, and he anchors that in the creation order, not just in cultural custom. And we need to respect that. We also have to be careful of the fact that people have been projecting on them ever since. And sometimes that was negatively in terms of trying to turn Junia into a male and Junius. And most often by neglect. How much have you heard about these women? How many times has it been emphasized how many women Paul is commending for their work and their ministry in Romans 16? We're very familiar with 1 Corinthians 14 and 1 Timothy 2, perhaps maybe not as familiar with Romans 16. And that speaks to priorities and how sometimes there have been overextensions, over-applications of the principles found in 1 Corinthians 14 and 1 Timothy chapter 2. On the other hand, a lot of people now wanted to impose a lot of modern egalitarian and philosophically liberal assumptions on the work of Junia, Phoebe, and Priscilla, assuming that they are preaching in the assemblies, active in church leadership, etc., which are just as unfounded of assumptions, just as much speculation. There is ambiguity whether we like it or not. Is Phoebe a deaconess or a servant? Is Junia among the apostles or an apostle? And even if an apostle, what is the nature of the apostolic ministry? And what can we really say about apostolic ministry? We are speculating about any specific definitive answer of those questions. It is beyond us to say definitively. We'd love to. The New Testament evidence is ambiguous. We need to respect and honor that. And so that is where we need to kind of look at ourselves when we look at how we understand these women. Because so much of their story is going to be filled in by us based upon the assumptions we bring to that table. And they often tell us more about us than about these women themselves. But in all of it, we should not neglect the fact that Priscilla and Junia and Phoebe are in the cloud of witnesses. They are honored Christians of Paul, who has spoken of them warming glowingly. They have been honored. We will meet them in the resurrection. We will be able to talk with them and hopefully learn all kinds of fantastic stories about the things that they endured and experienced as they jointly participated in ministry with Paul. Yes, we need to work out and grapple with what does that look like in light of what we see in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and 1 Corinthians 14. The way that what it looks like is that maybe women aren't preaching in the assembly in a mixed multitude. Women aren't necessarily in leadership in the assembly. On the other hand, that does not mean that women don't have their own work in proclaiming the gospel in their lives, teaching and addressing people privately like Priscilla did. They have their own commissions to do their own service, kind of like Junia did. They can be patronesses and provide great support for individuals and for congregations like Phoebe did. These are all that women are to be honored as equal in the sight of God in Christ, equal workers with men in the work of God in Christ, and should receive that honor and value, that they are not reckoned as second-class citizens, not treated as second-class citizens, but honored and valued as fellow heirs of the grace of life. Because when we join in the resurrection, we will be with Junia, Phoebe, and Priscilla, who have been thus honored by Paul, honored in the Lord, and we should honor them as well. Love to hear any questions, comments you have about Junia, Phoebe, and Priscilla. Please let us know in the comments. I'm Ethan. I work with the Venice Church of Christ. We want to be of service and support and encouragement to you. If we can be of any support or encouragement, please reach out to us at VeniceChurchofChrist.org. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and YouTube. And may the Lord bless and keep you until we're able to meet again.